Today, I'm going to rank every Red Dead Redemption 2 deck collection mission in a tier list, starting from the worst deck collections and going all the way up to the best deck collections. 95% of my viewers are unsubscribed, so if you like to see more content like this, subscribe as I'll be posting tier lists every single day. In last place, I have the Lilly Millet deck collection mission. I don't think this one's all that interesting. I mean, you just go over to Lilly Millet and then you take the money from like her boyfriend, or I don't really know exactly what Cooper is from her, but like Cooper has her money and then you just beat the shit out of him. So I don't know. This mission isn't all that interesting, and I feel like it's just a really boring mission in the whole deck collection thing. I feel like these are always the ones that I'd skip over because there's nothing really interesting going on in these early deck collection missions, and it really starts to ramp up as it gets further and further on, where there's a lot more interesting stuff and there's a lot more like actual decisions Arthur has to make. So because of that, I think I'm going to have to put this one into D tier. In 8th place, I have the Chick Matthews one. Again, similar to the Lilly Millet one, this one is pretty straightforward. I mean, at least you can like capture Chick right away if you do like know who he is, but he does flee right away, and then you have to do the treasure map thing, which I mean, it really just sends you exactly to where the treasure is or like the debt is. But I think this one is kind of interesting, and I feel like actually capturing Chick Matthews and like the whole mission here is a little bit more interesting than like the Lilly Millet one. There's at least like a little bit of nuance to it where it's not just the super generic and straightforward, oh, you just beat the shit out of this guy and you get his money like the first two are. But I think this one has a little bit more nuance, but there's nothing really special going on with this one, and I definitely am going to have to put it into C tier. In 7th place, I've got the deck collection of Mr. Wrobel. I think this one is like kind of interesting because it's the first one, and like that has to put it up an extra tier, but there's not really much going on. You just kind of beat him up a lot, and there's not really any like interesting fun things to go on, but you kind of do get introduced to the whole deck collection thing through this one. And I mean, you can't hear anything from Wrobel, so I feel like there's not any like interesting conversations between him and Arthur, and you just see Arthur like at this point is kind of just mad and angry, and he just wants to get the money here. So I don't know. This one isn't really all that special to me, but just because it is the first mission, it kind of introduces you to the debt recollection missions. I feel like it has to at least go into C tier. In 6th place, I've got the J. John Weathers one. This one isn't really that interesting in the actual like debt collection part, but after the debt collection part where he shows his wife and all that, I feel like it does get a little bit more interesting, but I feel like this is more to like spring Arthur's sense of morality, where it's like, oh, I then have to take care of my pregnant wife and you ruined all my supplies and everything. I feel like that's the whole point of this mission. But I think this one is a lot more interesting because there is that little fight against the army. I mean, it's not that much, but it is kind of fun to do, and eventually seeing that this guy had a pregnant wife and then Arthur eventually like absolves the debt if you're like trying to do good Arthur. It really shows that this mission is just does not make sense at all because Arthur just goes there. You know, he does save them, but he kind of also hurts them in the way that he sets the wagon on fire. Overall, I think this mission is a lot more interesting than a lot of the other deck collection missions, but it's not interesting enough to put it any higher than B tier. In 5th place, about the Algie Davidson deck collection mission. I mean, this one's kind of interesting just because you have the whole relationship and dynamic with his son and his mother. Like, they need to do the whole thing. But I think the whole like, oh, I'm going to fight this big enforcer guy that's coming to collect the money is a little bit of an oversight on Algie's part. I mean, of course it is, but I think it is really interesting to see the dynamic between the son and his father. And if you do kill Algie during this first mission, you can come back and see Nate just becomes a drunkard like his father and doesn't really get any of the same, interests that he should be doing and like going with his mother and all that. I just feel like overall, this is like a really sad mission because you just see how drunk fathers like this can really instill the same thing into their children, and just not having a good father and just a good family in general can really just set you up for life into a really bad situation. So I really love this one, and I think it has to be one of the better deck collection missions, but I think the gameplay in this mission isn't really all that interesting. You just kind of fight against this guy, and there's nothing like really interesting going on besides the nuances between Nate, his father, and the mother of Nate. And I think this overall has to also go in B tier. Is pretty cool mission, but there's really nothing special going on gameplay wise. In 4th place, I've got the Gwyn Hughes deck collection mission. I actually really like this one because there are like these two separate parts. You first go up to Gwyn and get that coffin, and he's like building a coffin, and then he's like, yo, I gotta steal some money from the dead. I feel like that's kind of fun, and especially if you're doing that at night, I feel like there's a little bit different of a vibe when everyone's like coming into the cemetery and everything. You just beat the shit out of them. I don't know. I feel like this is just fun in a way where it's like, oh, you're kind of stealing from these dead people, even though they don't really need the money, but like it is kind of a cool sense of like, oh, stealing from the graves, and it's pretty cool. And it also kind of reminds me of the Angelo Bronte one where you also take the money from the grave. And I just think overall this one is a little bit more interesting than some of the other ones, even though it doesn't have that same like story-wise component. It is, I don't know, kind of cool to steal stuff. I feel like in general there's not really that much like you can have these like sneaking around missions where you're stealing stuff in Red Dead Redemption 2. And this one really does that. So I don't know, I really like this one, and I think Gwyn as a character is kind of interesting because he does this exact same thing, and he actually like is taking money from other people instead of just repaying his debt. It seems like, I mean, clearly he has the means to get money. Like, I mean, he could have just stolen money here, but it seems like when Arthur actually comes, he finally like breaks and, steals the money. So overall, I feel like this one is really cool. There's not really that much going on story-wise, but I feel like because the gameplay here is actually pretty fun, I think it definitely has to go into B tier as well. In third place, I've got the Winton Holmes debt collection mission. I actually really, really like this one. I feel like with Winton Holmes, I don't know, you're kind of like his friend here, and just overall, this debt collection mission is one of the more interesting ones where you actually have to like go and hunt the white cougar to get your debt back. And I feel like just finding the white cougar in general is really interesting, and like doing it within a debt collection mission, I feel like makes the debt collection mission so much more interesting, especially when Winton dies actually in it. And I feel like that's really funny where you go into the cave and just the guy is dead within the first like 15 seconds of being in the cave. I feel like that's pretty funny. And the whole thing where he's like, oh, let's split up. It's going to be easier to find the cougar, and he dies. I don't know. I really like this mission, and the fact that it like introduces you to a special animal with the white cougar here, I feel like it really takes it up a notch. And while I don't think Winton's all that interesting, he says he has no money, but then he's trying to find this cougar this entire time. I don't think it's all that interesting, but the fact that he does die trying to like collect the debt also does reinforce the fact that almost all of these debtors here are in a worse place after they actually, have to pay off or their debt gets absolved by Strauss. So it really shows that Strauss's motives really just take from these people and give to them, which, shows that Strauss is a bad guy. But overall, I feel like this is a really cool one just because you do actually have to hunt for the cougar and get the cougar to collect the debt. So I think this one definitely has to go into A tier just because it's so unique compared to the other debt recollection missions. In second place, it has to be the Arthur Londonderry debt recollection mission. I really love this one, especially when Arthur, goes into the mines here, especially when Archie also worked in the mines. I feel like these two missions really mirror themselves with the Downs mission and the Londonderry mission, where Arthur goes into the mines to find the foreman, and the foreman's like, Londonderry's died. You can't collect the debt from him anymore. He was slaving himself away to get your debt. And I feel like it just really puts Arthur in his place and shows him that, yeah, collecting debt is a really, really bad thing. And Strauss is just a really bad member of the gang. And, while Arthur doesn't have that much time left to live, he should be helping these people instead of hurting them. And that's why he absolves the debt. So I just feel like this one really shows Arthur as a character. And I think it really mirrors the Downs mission because you have this person that's, working themselves off to pay your debt and they die because of it. And then you have to like kind of help their family also because of that. So I don't know. I really like this one. And I think because it's also reflected in like Arthur's last ride and all that, I feel like this one really, shapes Arthur as a character and shows him that, yeah, Strauss is like good deeds or whatever, for the camp is really hurting a lot of other people and is making their lives a lot worse, and he should not take any part of it. So I feel like the big reason why Arthur eventually kicks Strauss out of here. I think this is why it has to go in A tier. It's definitely a great recollection mission. I feel like it really works to serve both the story and Arthur's story. And even if you don't get to do this one, I feel like it really still helps to serve that Arthur's becoming a good person when he does eventually kick Strauss out. So overall, this one definitely has to go into A tier. There was only one mission that could go in the top tier, and it has to be collecting Thomas Downs' debt here, just because this one actually plays a role in the story with Thomas Downs giving Arthur tuberculosis here. I feel like this whole like mission in general, while the other missions with the Downses aren't really part technically of this debt recollection mission, I feel like overall it is its own thing where like Arthur helps out the Downses and, gets them to do better, bigger and better things, because he felt bad about beating the shit out of Thomas Downs here, and then eventually contracting tuberculosis. He just wanted something, to feel right and for him to feel right. And I feel like this one is just a better version of the Londonderry debt recollection mission, and just overall, of course, shapes the story the most because it turns Arthur into this caring, compassionate man after he realizes Strauss's things are bad, and he realizes he doesn't have a lot of time left to live because he has tuberculosis, and he has to instead save other people instead of trying to save himself and get them off to this island paradise in Tahiti that might not even exist. So overall, I feel like this one has to be the best debt recollection mission. It's the only one that can go in S tier because it kind of has its own arc that goes outside of just this debt recollection mission. And it really just, characterizes Arthur as a whole, as a person, because this mission and, when he gets tuberculosis in this mission really starts that character arc into turning him into a good person instead of this ruthless enforcer he is for Strauss, at least at the beginning of this. So overall, this one definitely has to be the best debt recollection mission and is definitely an S tier mission. That fully concludes my Red Dead Redemption 2 debt collection mission tier list. If you guys did like this video, please give it a like and subscribe, as we'll be posting these tier lists almost every single day.